What's up, everybody? We just got done podcasting with the crew here about low power variables. Those are a hit thing in the tactical and competitive shooting community right now. As many of you may already be aware, kind of taking the place of red dots, kind of taking the place of more high power scopes, who knows? So we talked all about those, their applications, how they work, all that good stuff right here. And if you watch through or listen through the entire thing, you'll even hear about an exciting new product that is in that category from Vortex. So stay tuned and let us know what you think about that new product, how excited you are about it too. Thanks. What's up, everybody? The great Mark Boardman here has just dropped a new idiom on us, if you will. You can make an elephant drink water. What does that actually pertain to? What situation would you find yourself in a day-to-day setting where you'd say, hey, well, you can make an elephant drink water?
Zero situations, Jim. I think actually the correct one is you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But I was just kind of...
And the elephant just made its way in.
The elephant in the room.
Hey, if an elephant gets thirsty enough,
he'll drink.
Yeah?
It's carrying a straw around, so...
So, with that said, naturally, speaking of elephants and horses and water, we're going to talk about low-power variable optics today. And across the table from Mark and I, we have Rob, who has joined us in the past, from the Engineering Product Development Department, and he is going to be able to speak to some of the more nerdy details about these LPVOs, as they are sometimes referred to. And then we also have Adam Maxwell across the table, and Adam is kind of embedded in on the practical application side of these optics, in that you work in our MIL-LEO department, and you also shoot competitively quite often and have used a number of LPVOs. And so I know you mentioned a few interesting topics that we could discuss, and one of the big ones, so, for those of you, I guess we'll just do a real quick refresher for anybody not intimately familiar with these. When we say low-power variable optic, we're discussing any optic that essentially starts on 1 power, right? So it's 1 to something. There's 1 to 4s, 1 to 6s, 1 to 8s, yada, 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 so on and so forth. And the idea is, how long have these kind of scopes been around, I guess?
1994.
1994. Interesting. They're about
specific.
Just as old as I am.
Okay.
And so these have kind of come around, and the unique thing is that you have, your red dots, and your red dot is a very close quarter optic. It can only be 1x, or there is no magnification that is providing you. And then you have your higher power riflescopes, like a 3 to 9, 4 to 12, 6 to 24, 4 to 16, whatever it might be. And that's not exactly something you can use for close quarter. So for a long time, you had to kind of choose one or the other. Or, of course, even before red dots, you just had iron sights, right?
Yep.
So you kind of had to choose one or the other. And this is sort of the happy medium that allows you to do a little bit of both. And, Adam, you mentioned one thing that I found, as I really got to thinking about it, I found pretty intriguing, is that these kinds of optics are now changing the dynamic of so many practical applications of firearms, and then that, MIL-LEO, competition, self-defense kind of thing. They really have changed the capabilities of firearms. I would say, firearms have even changed to adapt to be able to be kind of these do-it-all, if you will, firearms, or people are sort of adapting themselves to be more do-it-all shooters. Would you say that's kind of what's you're seeing?
I would say the application of I guess we could say that the genesis of this type of optic would be out of the Battle of Mogadishu in 1993. So that was where the military first took an interest in a low-power variable optic, because for anyone who's seen the movie Black Hawk Down, they had an urban setting where they kind of had to pick out hostile faces in crowds of civilians. So the Army Special Forces put out a solicitation basically for this type of optic. And at the time, the industry wasn't really interested in it. Really, Schmidt and Bender were the only ones that would touch it. And it kind of largely went unaddressed for a long period of time.
Okay.
And really kind of picked up the ball again. One of the key scopes that did that was when the Gen 1 and Gen 2 razors came out, was when the interest really picked up on that again. And then it was also right at the beginning of the global war on terror. So there was all kind of energy that got put behind these scopes. But essentially we were kind of evolving out of an era where a service rifle basically had iron sights.
Yeah.
And the limitation was vision of the individual shooter. And then as optics started to get put on board, they started to find new capabilities for stuff, or they could put more capabilities in the hands of what we could call lay people. So instead of before where the only people who had scopes or had magnifications were essentially sharpshooters or snipers, well, now we can put that kind of capability into the hands of general troopers or patrol officers, things of that nature, and now we can make people more effective with common carbines, essentially. The capability of the carbine was always there, but you need the interface to apply it, essentially.
Oh, okay. Got it.
It seems like such a good idea, and it is a good idea, right? And was it met with resistance or maybe lack of interest because it was just change, or was it too expensive, or they were worried about things breaking, or maybe all those things?
All along the way, up until the present day. I mean, that's a full-time job convincing people of the merits of such a system. But yeah, essentially, it has military doctrine and law enforcement administrations are very slow to change by nature, and they need to be convinced of these things. Well, we've always had iron sights. Why do we need optics now? And well, if we give guys optics, are they going to break? And the whole thing is that's definitely an ongoing process. Initially in the industry, like when that initial solicitation came out, there wasn't really anything there. They probably had to be convinced that there was demand for it. There's lots of good ideas that get brought to us here at Vortex. Rob probably sifts through hundreds of good ideas, but is there a market demand for it?
Right.
Mm-hmm. So I think that was probably what limited its growth in the beginning. And then also it just missed the SOPMOD M4 program for SOCOM. That's the kit of an AR-15 that came with all the cool gadgets in one box, and then they would configure the rifle.
Oh, okay.
So it missed. There wasn't something to solicit for that project, and so in the government, when you miss those things, they've decided this is what it's going to be, and it's going to be that way for a long time until they decide something else. So when that program kind of ran one or two cycles, that's when they came back to these, and that's when the industry was ready with earlier or evolved editions of low power variable optics. And then once they got some traction behind them, that drove the development into what they are today, where they essentially have all the capabilities of red dots and higher magnification scopes.
Would you guys say, have we seen a significant increase in... we know that we've seen a significant increase in the number of low power variables out there. That's unquestionable, because you're talking about, there's not that long ago where you could hardly even find one. Mm-hmm. Has the technology behind them and the quality and performance behind them also been improving along with the just number of options out there that we've seen? And what would you find mostly in the improvements? I'm thinking back to the Gen 1 Razor.
Yeah.
That 1-4 first focal plane, interestingly enough.
Well, that's a term that lives on today. Is it true one? When the Gen 1 Razor came out, that was a thing to have a scope that was a true 1 power, because a lot of offerings on the market were like a 1.1 or a 1.5 or something like that. They couldn't quite get all the way there with an optical system. So when the scopes came out that had a true 1 power, that was a game changer. And then once we had a true 1 power, well, what's the eye box behind there, or the eye relief on that scope? That evolved. What's the illumination capabilities of a scope? That's evolved quite a bit.
That's true, yeah.
All those kinds of things. So you don't have to go. It's kind of like what we're seeing right now in rangefinders. Rangefinding technology is kind of the Wild West. Well, if you rewind 3 years in low power variable technology, that was the Wild West to jump from, and our competitors coming out with evolutions in this product too. And so it was kind of everybody coming out with a new thing, and then you had to match what that guy had and come out with something new. So yeah, we've seen pretty rapid evolution. Again, kind of going back to, you can kind of trace it back to the global war on terror heating up quite a bit, where we were deployed in Afghanistan. So now engagements for the average combat soldier were a couple hundred yards, where they were shooting across valleys or things like that, or they needed some of that capability.
Yeah.
So then there started to be some monetary incentive to develop these kinds of things, because there was a need in a in a hot military action that was going on.
Well, and that's the big thing everybody always wants to know is you scan the forums, you scan Reddit, you scan whatever messages we get in all the time on social media, and you see a lot of people asking, do I get a red dot or do I get a low power variable? And the question comes up most likely because a lot of these people are thinking, for your average civilian, you're thinking, okay, I'm going to be at 100-yard range. Maybe that's about basically all I have. And for, at 100-yard range, if you're shooting with a red dot, you can hit a steel target just fine.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, even out to, 2, 3, whatever. You can hit a steel target just fine. We also know there's some just insanely good marksmen out there. Who's that one guy who shoots out to like 700 yards with a red dot or something like that?
I may have done that.
Oh, it's Adam.
That's right. Actually, yes, I've seen it. Also with the Spitfire, with the Spitfire AR.
Apparently, we got the right guy.
We got that guy. He's here. Yeah. Every time I say that, I always think it's like
podcast
super crazy.
is over. You don't need a low power variable.
You don't need one.
Someone much cooler than me.
Anyway, but you can do those things. But then they're also wondering to themselves. There's always the yes, but if this happens, it'd be nice to be able to zoom in a little bit. So how does that break down? Like, where are you suggesting when somebody asks, should I get a red dot? Should I commit to the one power only thing, lightweight, fast, or should I get the low power variable?
I think in the beginning, you're kind of working into, you can compartmentalize that into two things. In the beginning, the scopes were much more fragile than they are today.
Really? Okay.
So, I mean, if you go back, variable power scopes, the mechanisms themselves were just fragile. So you were trading that magnification capability for robustness. A red dot's a pretty relatively indestructible thing by comparison.
Kind of foolproof for the most part.
So you got that. And then also, I think what has changed the paradigm now that the technology in scopes has improved and the political environment that some professionals operate in, military and law enforcement, there are severe consequences for shooting the wrong thing. Mm-hmm. Especially in law enforcement, you don't have to watch the news very long that some innocent person got shot. Well, now you have an optic on a rifle where they can zoom in. It might only be 50 yards away, but they can tell if it's a cell phone or a handgun in their hand. Mm-hmm. They can tell if it's the right guy. They can watch situations unfold, but they still have that red dot capability. That's primarily what the rifle needs to be used for. They still have that capability, and now it's been enhanced. So the bar has been raised on scopes that they can do everything that red dots can do now, and they have magnified capability.
Now very much tank-like, too, in their durability as well.
Yep.
So what you're implying, then, it almost seems like, look at the low-power variable optic as not as a one-power optic that can zoom in, and not so much like it's a higher magnification optic, like a 6 or even an 8X or whatever, that happens to be able to do one power.
Correct.
So its primary function is to be a one-power optic with the
Yep, and I would say that's how the customer's perception of it has evolved. If we in this last 5 years, even when you talk about reticles. Reticles, everyone wants these reticles to do all kinds of cool things. It's like, well, yeah, that's cool, but it's not a PRS scope. Like,
right.
Are you giving something up for having a technical reticle in an optic like this? Yeah. Or is that a good, are there reticles that are a good compromise in between there? So.
Yeah. When you're talking to somebody who's then also considering the red dot, and this is something I've never really been able to explain to somebody super well, because even I still go and I get red dots for certain firearms that I put together. I can't really explain what it is about a firearm when it's like when I build one or when I buy one where I'm like, that gets a red dot, that gets a 1-6. How do you put that in words, would you say? Let's talk, because we talked about the low power variable. How about the red dot? Like, what's a firearm where you're like, that gets a red dot for sure?
I would say in the current state of things, red dots are still king and are preferable for rifles where speed of application is number one. If putting bullets on target as fast as possible with as little interaction, it's as point and click as it has to be. That's what a red dot can do. And if where it went from being a general purpose optic, I think it's kind of switched places now with variable power optics, where because scopes can do what they can do now, I think a red dot is a specialized application. It's like, okay, I can say that this carbine is only for home defense. Well, measure some of the distances in your house, that's not very far. But, time is life there. Same thing where even in military applications, if you got guys who are dedicated assaulters, or they're going on a mission where they're just going to fast rope onto a building and clear a building, okay, well, they don't need a scope. But if that person is going out on a tour of duty in a very rural place where there might be some CQB, but they also have other things, this is a more general purpose optic now.
Yeah.
But if you can say that a weapon system is for a very specific application, and that is a very rapid engagement type application, that's where the red dot still lives.
That's a good way of putting it. The specialized nature of it, I hadn't thought of that terminology before, but it makes sense.
And I think you're speaking to it from a great standpoint, but it being mainly military and law enforcement, a little bit of home defense stuff too. So I guess that's civilian market. But also cost comes into it a little bit. How much somebody wants to spend on something. If you look at our Crossfire red dot at $150, that's a great option for home defense and an inexpensive AR pistol build or whatever you want to do. And then I think our 1-6 Strike Eagle is probably our least expensive low power variable.
There's the 1-4 Crossfire.
1-4 Crossfire, sorry.
But even that's at $250, and the Strike Eagle 1-6 at $300.
Right.
So
there's that too, and trade offs between different features and the price. But it's ultimately come down to what's going to do the job best, I think, for you.
And as I think about it too, when you get a red dot, let's say you bring up the $150 Crossfire red dot, for example, excellent red dot. It does what it needs to do, which is it gives you a dot and it gives you no magnification because that's what you're getting it for. And to get that one power feel, if you will, that quickness and that sort of unimpeded free feeling, to get that in a low power variable on that scope's 1 power. I mean, we talk about it all the time. You look at the Razor 1-6. That's a $1,400 optic. And that delivers probably the most close to red dot-like feel that you can get. In a low power variable. You're spending $1,400 for it. And of course, you're getting all the benefits of being able to zoom in and everything. But then when you spend $150 on a red dot, it's like, well, if all you wanted was the red dot feel, then you can spend $150 and just get the red dot feel. You can't get any of the other benefits, but you can just get that.
But like you said, if all you need is the one, you got the one.
Right. The other thing, I guess, with red dots too is there is no eye relief, so there is no eye box for a red dot. As long as the dot, you can move your head wherever you need to, and if you can see the dot, then you're in good shape. The Gen 2 1-6 has got an incredible eye box, but you still have to be in a general vicinity for it to work. So I guess in the instance that you have some really strange shooting position that you would need to be in, maybe you'd run into an issue with a low power variable. But
Well, I would suppose there's a little bit of a size weight advantage to the red dot.
100%.
Yeah. Rob, speaking to the low power variable on the engineering side of things. Now, inside this optic, are we looking at anything that's much dramatically different than a high power optic, like at 6-24, 4-16, stuff that people are real used to for hunting, long range shooting?
The general construction is largely similar. You've got an objective focal system, you've got we'll call it a zoom focal system, and then you've got an eyepiece focal system, or optical system, I should say. They're not all focal systems, sorry. But it's similar in that instance to higher magnification scopes. The thing that's more difficult to correct for, and probably, I don't know, as much of the genesis of the low power variable as Adam does, or why, the first one that came out was like a 1.1 or a 1.5. But my guess would be that it's really difficult to, or it's gotten easier with technology and design ideologies and things like that throughout time. But it's tough to correct down for a true 1 power image reconstruction without recreating a bunch of aberrations in the process or undesirable things in the process. That would be my guess as to why it wasn't a true 1 power initially. Back in 94, I mean, that's 25 years ago. So since then, I think as optical designs have evolved, different glass types have become available, different manufacturing processes have been become available, and then that all drives costs down a little bit and makes it more attainable in kind of the commercial market or even in the high-end market. I mean, this is $1,400 as we were talking about. So
it's pretty crazy to think about, though, because you're taking light and an image through this optic, and it has to go through, we talked about in Riflescope, all about Riflescopes with Dave, just up to, sometimes well over 10 lenses in the system, and you're taking all that through, it's bouncing around, it's getting bent around, flipped upside down, who knows what, zoomed, unzoomed, and then at the end, you're trying to produce an image on the other side that looked exactly like it was before it got manipulated at all.
Yep.
So that's got to be quite a process, and then also give it the flexibility to then zoom in from there.
Yep.
So I can only imagine the optical engineer is.
Yeah. It's definitely a different approach that needs to be done to the optical design. I mean, if you think about this as a 1:6, right? And then the 3:18 and the 4.5:27 that we have are also 6x ratio scopes.
Speaking to the Razor Gen 2s here, yeah.
Yep, sorry. Get my water bottle all the way here. But you can't use the same optical system. Like, this wouldn't be, copied and pasted into the 3:18 and the 4.5:27.
Right.
Because it's... You have to deal with a much wider angle at 1 power, because having good field of view is also important, because if it's a narrow field of view at 1 power, yeah, you're still getting a 1 power experience, but you're getting a much more like tunnely sight picture than you would be if you had a wider field of view.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's something that this scope does really well. You have a nice wide field of view and a generous eye box, so it gets you really close to a red dot sight picture. So
right. For sure. And then let's also talk to a few of the, I guess I'll call them misconceptions, for lack of a better term, that some people see when they think of low power variables. One, first thing you mentioned as you're going back from the objective to the zoom to the eyepiece, but the objective, right? So they're small in comparison to, let's say, my 6-24 by 50. Now, many people, I know we've discussed this in other podcasts before, many people will look at objective size as the sole determining factor of, light transmission, low light ability.
Yep.
In many cases, though, for folks listening here, we've talked about the Razor Gen 2 1:6 here a lot. That is because it is literally just right in front of us right now. But there's also the PST Gen 2 1:6. There's the Strike Eagles we've mentioned. But let's look at again just this Razor Gen 2 in front of us. This might be one of our brightest, most great in low light scope, one of the best in our lineup.
Yep.
And has a 24 millimeter objective.
Yeah.
So that, that's not telling the whole story. Sometimes people, I've seen it where they're just not used to these kinds of optics, and it's a 24 millimeter objective. You guys got to crank that up to at least 32. And it's like, well, not really.
Yeah.
And can you go on and explain that? Like, why you could crank this thing up a little bit. I mean, it's not like it's going to take up really any more space. It already sucks in underneath the turrets,
Yeah.
So why isn't it bigger?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'll go back to the Riflescope podcast that you did with Dave Hamilton a few weeks back, and he was talking about kind of that rubber sheet that ends up getting stretched as you're doing a product design, right?
Oh, right.
And so I'll come back to that, but I wanted to caveat it. So the thing that you can do, and people are right in saying that the larger the objective lens that you have, the more or the brighter. Conceptually, that's correct. You're able to gather more light, so you're starting with like a larger amount of light, if you will. Another thing I've heard is like the tube diameter is what leads to image brightness, and that's not the case. It's really limited by the objective lens.
Okay.
That being said, also the glass types and the lens design, those are all really critical in reproducing a bright image. The coatings that are on those lenses are also really important. So it's kind of like, if you could have the largest objective lens that you want, but if you lose really poor transmission glasses or you do really like incorrect coatings in the wrong spots, you're not going to get great light transmission. So
Okay.
conceptually it's correct, but in practice or in application, it's not that simple. Going back to the rubber sheet thing, if you wanted to make this a 32 millimeter objective lens, now what ends up happening is you need to basically re-image rays that are coming from a wider angle to get through the same. You have what's called like a faster lens system.
Okay.
So you'd have to do more correction for that image in order for it not to appear distorted or have some weird anomalies going on. So you can do that, but it's not always going to be the most most beneficial. The other thing too to keep in mind is the objective lens relative to the magnification at higher powers relates to your exit pupil diameter.
Right.
So as long as you're, bigger than what your pupil is going to be dilated to, you're going to have quite a bit of kind of forgiveness on head placement before the image starts to wink out. So that's another thing that we kind of keep in mind. And, we got a lot of different things to balance in order to deliver the best scope that you can from a user standpoint. So those are a couple of things that relate to the objective lens size. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, yeah, I
specifically
think
or
that
not,
does.
but-
Just in many ways, I think it comes down to when people ask, well, "Why don't you put a bigger objective on it?" It's just, well, we don't need it. You don't need a bigger objective. It's not really actually. In fact, if anything, it might hurt the performance of the optic, and then it makes it bigger and heavier, and all those things.
I really hate I hate the answer. It depends, but unfortunately, when it comes to optical design, that's really the answer that ends up. And one of our optical engineers, Christian, says that a lot too. It's like, and he's right. We always razz him about it and give him a hard time, but he's right. It really does depend a lot on the situation and what you're planning on using the scope for and things like that. And going back to the true 1 power thing, way back when in 94, they may have been able to get it down to actually 1 power, but there may have been a ton of spherical aberration or something like that would have been, basically made the scope unusable, or they would have had to really narrow down the field of view in order to eliminate that or something, to that effect. And so they decided to go to 1.1 or 1.5 because it doesn't totally confuse your brain with when you're seeing that and defeat the purpose of using the scope.
Right.
So.
Gotcha.
No, another classic thing that I've seen is, some people will see an optic that is true 1 power, like, Razor 1:6, PST Gen 2 1:6, Strike Eagle 1 to, whatever. They get it up to their eye, and they put it on 1 power, and they start saying, well, wait a minute, this doesn't look like 1 power.
Yeah.
Something's funky.
Yep.
It looks a little smaller, or it looks a little bigger, or what's going on? And a lot of times they can't put their finger on it. Sometimes they'll just say, it looks like 1.1, or it looks like 0.9, or something like that. What's going on there?
So that has to deal with the diopter adjustment, and
Which normally is just for your reticle.
it is the thing that's
Your
different
reticle
with
focus.
low power variables. It's also what sets your true or what sets your low end magnification. So, funny story here. We were doing a bunch of competitive testing out at the range we used to go to, and I ran a course with a Razor 1:6, and the diopter wasn't adjusted for my prescription. And so this was like one of the first times I'd gone out shooting before, but this was one of the first times I had shot a low power variable, and let alone a bunch of them. And so it just so happened that the person that shot before me had a different enough prescription, and where the diopter was for them, everything looked great, and where it was for me looked not that great. So I ran the stage. We kind of did a timed, like a 3-gun stage, and so timed it and then looked at hits and zones and stuff like that after the fact. And I was like, well, I did okay, but I really, I don't know, this Razor isn't really, what everybody says.
Yeah,
it
what's
is.
everybody
It's
talking
like,
about here?
What's all the hubbub about here? And then Scott's like, oh, you have to adjust the diopter for your eye prescription. And I was like, oh, I feel like an idiot now. So I did that, and I was like, oh, okay, now I see what all the hype's about. So
It does make a significant difference.
huge difference. So if you, and the thing too with low power variables, at least what I do, which maybe based on that last story, don't listen to what I'm about to say, but Adam, you can maybe throw some credibility to it. When I've got a low power variable mounted up to an AR, as an example, I'm shooting with both eyes open, and so what I'll do is I'll adjust the diopter until kind of I see both of those images sync up to be at the same magnification, and then I find too when I zoom into 6 power in this instance that the reticle is still really in focus too there. So
Yep, I would concur. That's what I do as well. Especially in most of the applications that these are used for, shooting on more on 1 and 2 power than I am on 5 and 6 power. So I optimize the image for that end of the power spectrum. But it's also, usually it's not too far off from where you would be on a properly adjusted reticle image as well. So and then once we find that spot, we witness mark it on our personal scopes. We make a mark on there with a Sharpie so we know
you can see if it moves.
Yeah, because a lot of people won't. They either don't touch that thing when they first get the scope. They just pull it out, go with it right away as is. Or some people will kind of fiddle around with it a lot. Some people are guilty of just over fiddling with the diopter, right?
Oh yeah.
Like they think that as I'm shooting at this distance or as I'm shooting at that distance, I need to change it for different distances. Or that looks a little bit funny, so I'm going to change it here until it looks right, and then I'm going to look over at another thing, and I think that looks a little funny, so I'm going to change it again. Really, it's kind of like a one-and-done, set it and forget it kind of thing, unless it somehow gets bumped. Like you said, you kind of witness mark it there. But, that's the intention is that once you set it, you should be pretty much good.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, that's right.
So I'd say those are pretty much the biggest things that I see. It's just a lot of it revolves around the 1 power stuff. The objective thing I've seen from time to time, but a lot of it revolves around 1 power. And like you said earlier, a lot of people get this thing to be a 1 power optic that happens to be able to zoom in.
Right. Yep. And then the design also behind it, it being 1 power, like Rob said, being 1 power, but also having the field of view experience and the so it doesn't feel like you're looking through a tube. Essentially on that 1 power, being able to present a reticle in space.
Yeah,
that's the magic of it.
Yep.
So,
I know you alluded to it a little bit earlier, Adam, but just on the mil-LEO side of things, does it seem like the popularity and hype that we see in the civilian side of the market is echoed in that arena? Kind of more and more people adopting this type of thing. Do you also see just a difference in I can't tell if I'm just sort of immersed in it a lot or I go on Instagram a lot and I see a lot of people training and stuff and whatnot on Instagram. Do you also feel like these have forced people to need to work on their marksmanship and just ensuring that they are essentially a good shot more? It's just is it kind of like with more power comes more responsibility? And it no pun intended.
I don't think so. I think people almost think they're more complicated than they are. You know, they think, it's kind of like anything on scopes. Like people think there's a whole bunch of hocus pocus voodoo inside there when really they're like mechanically they're pretty simple devices.
Yeah.
You know? So I think a lot of people think they're more complicated than they are. And so for that reason, especially on the shooting classes side of it, like instructors get asked all the time, if you watch the live feeds and the chats and all, well, what do you think about low power variables? Is it, this or is it that? And guys who shoot a lot are like, yeah, dude, it's real. It's legit. Like, it's okay. We'll give you permission. You can have one, but everyone, it's just kind of that transitional phase of like, well, is it time yet? Can it do what I do?
Yeah.
Well, and I can understand how that can be a little intimidating, right? Because with a red dot, you basically mount it, you get it zeroed, and then you adjust your brightness, and that's pretty much it. There's nothing else to it. There's no.
You don't have to level it in rings. You don't have to do that.
Yeah, you don't have to adjust magnification. You don't have to worry about if it's a first focal plane or a second focal plane rifle scope. You don't have to worry about anything that's going on with a reticle and needing to make heads or tails out of that. Is it a BDC reticle? Is it not? It's just a dot. It's just that simple. Yeah. But it's really once you get into it, it's not as intimidating, I think, as it sounds.
Right.
That could be maybe what.
Yeah, but there is more to it. I mean, you do a lot of trainings, right? From a training perspective, red dot, pretty simple. I mean, there is a little bit more to these optics,
I think a lot of the training on these optics is boiling down how simple it is. Like, well, you think it's this complicated. Well, it's actually this simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also kind of think of it sometimes maybe helpful for folks to think of. It's kind of like phones. Like, I mean, we've been text messaging for a long time. And the text message that you would send on your old phone is still you saying, hey, what's for dinner, as it is now. but the operating system you're on has completely different capabilities as well. So, an iPhone does all kinds of things, but it still sends a message. It's still an interface for sending a message. It just has all sorts of other capabilities too, to help you communicate with the world. So, same kind of thing. We're interfacing where a bullet's going to land when we shoot it. We just have a lot more detailed control over what it does now.
Makes sense. I feel like now's a good time to intro the new one.
The new one, Jim?
The new one.
Oh, sure.
Because
the new one to what,
the
Jim?
new 1 to 10.
Oh.
The Razor Gen 3.
Yep.
Because as we discussed sort of how the low power variable has changed the landscape of so many things in shooting, this one, and I genuinely believe it's not just my own personal like super hyped upness about this scope, but this one is likely to be sort of the next level of changing the game, if you will. This is the Gen 3 Razor, and it feels weird to be talking about it in front of
is it cool? We can...
and discussing it on the recording.
Yeah,
because
it's been pretty hush hush for a long time now.
For a long time, yeah. The Gen 2 1 to 6 that we mentioned time and time again here is now being what's the next? It now has an air. Is that what you would call it?
Yeah, I'd say it's like the evolution.
I don't want to ruin the excitement by just screwing up my vocabulary. But yes, it's the next evolution.
I think honestly, we're nervous to talk about it.
It is.
We're so excited about it.
The excitement level. It's over 9,000.
Yes, and I also feel like just by talking about it, like on camera being recorded, like there's possibly like one of these things like looking at me right now, telling me not to.
Yes, Vortex, very dangerous place to work.
Yeah.
Nerf guns everywhere.
Don't say the wrong thing.
If I may, just because I think, it's, and for the folks listening and not watching it on YouTube, they're not going to be able to see the difference, but I'm just going to do this real quick so people can see that it actually is a different scope because it looks very similar. It's still Stealth Shadow. It's
Can't get it in black. Sorry.
Can't get in black. It's the same length. It's the same weight as the diopters are in different positions. Jim.
Okay. I was just about to say it might be short, but yeah, same length.
Somebody had a different prescription.
Yeah, somebody had a different prescription. That's pretty
that is,
close there.
Yeah, basically dead on same length.
When
I first, same weight.
It's the same weight,
same
21
weight,
and a half or 21.6
even though
ounces.
now it's a 34 millimeter tube,
correct,
28 millimeter objective.
Nope, 24 still.
Did we say 1 to what yet?
It's a 1 to 10.
It's a 1 to 10.
Thank you.
It's the first focal plane. First focal plane as well.
First focal plane. The Razor's back to first focal plane.
We made it.
We made it back.
Full circle.
Oh man, yeah. And that you talk about too something with first focal planes and whatnot. So this is actually kind of this is a very toothy grin moment for me, I feel, because for so long people have been begging for a 1 to 8 first focal plane Razor, just begging for it. You need to make this Vortex.
Well, sorry,
we made a 1 to 10 first focal plane.
Well, it's also a 1 to 8,
but it can be a 1 to 8 as well.
Rob is right.
That was my favorite part of the interim where we couldn't talk about it. It was like, when are you guys coming out with a 1 to 8? I'm like, never.
Yep. And that's
never, but yes at the same time.
That is actually one of those things that you hear a lot about people discussing the idea of a first focal plane, a low power variable. Mm-hmm. Because when you get into the idea of first focal plane, you're talking about the point of first focal plane isn't to just be able to brag to your buddies at the range that it's first focal plane, right? So the actual point of it for all the Instagram commandos out there is so that you may utilize not just the reticle center crosshair. It has nothing to do with it. We're talking about all the reticles, subtensions, its lines, its hash marks, its dots, its whatever on any magnification for using as a reference in comparison to the size of the image, right? I'm probably overcomplicating it, but first focal plane is the one where the reticle appears to grow and shrink as you zoom in and out, but in reality it is not, because it is maintaining the same exact scale to the image as the image is growing and shrinking.
Yep.
Both are doing it at the same exact time. Now, some people used to complain. They'd say, well, the Razor Gen 2 1 to 6 is second focal plane, so I can't use that reticle on any other magnification. But then, there's just the idea that, well, with a low power variable on like 1 to 6, that reticle gets so tiny, or appears to get so tiny on 1 power, you're not going to be using those hash marks on 1 power. That's And really, as you zoom in and zoom in and zoom in, and the reticle appears to grow and grow and grow, and it gets finally to the point where you can even start to see those hash marks anymore and use them, you're almost to 6
You're
anyway.
maxed out anyway.
Yeah, just about.
Which, Jim, you brought up the original Razor HD 1-4, right? Which was amazing in concept, and I feel like this scope is kind of a lot of those concepts actually coming to fruition with all the practicality to make it work. Because, like you said, the 1-4, it was like a red dot on one, and it was first focal plane. And I guess it certainly could alleviate maybe if you weren't all the way on 4 and you were using your subtensions, some you get a little margin of error there,
3.8
perhaps
3.8 or something.
Yeah, but this makes sense.
It does. Would you say that's about right, Adam?
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of people think about it in kind of the terms that you were talking about, but the value of first focal plane and something like this, I think a big part of it is in the inverse. It's like now we can have a technical reticle that disappears.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Right.
Oh,
So I can
okay.
have
So it's
some of
not
those
in the way.
Yeah, so I can have some of those technical features when I want them, but when I don't want them on the lower powers, they become much more subdued.
It's a good way of putting it.
So
Another thing that's really important to point out on the Gen 3 here is that, so yes, we went to 10 power. Yes, it's first focal plane. I think equally as important is the reticle is actually truly daylight bright. So, so you have that literally like a red dot. To Adam's point, the reticle really shrinks down at 1 power. So effectively, you do have just a single red dot because the features are so close together at 1 power. But I mean, it's visible in I think almost every single lighting condition that I can dream of. I mean, we weren't in the desert or necessarily up but we did look at it against snow here in Wisconsin. Where there's a lot of reflection from sunlight on those handful of
sunburn off that stuff.
handful of sunny days we have in the winter with snow. But it was, I mean, it's pretty. It's really bright. I mean, to the point where I don't think I would want to run it at 11 unless it's like reflections off of snow or sand or something like that, and you're getting a lot of stray light back at you.
I can definitely say firsthand we've had it in a lot of environments, and my experience is exactly that. It is bright enough in any condition we put it in. In the desert in Vegas, in in Senderos in Texas, in the middle of winter, anywhere that we have taken the scope, it is plenty bright to do whatever it is you need to do.
Is that difficult to get in a first focal plane?
It's really difficult, yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to call that out specifically, because if you look at our Strike Eagle line as an example, those are also, I mean, once we get into reticles, you'll see the reticles there's some commonality there where you have some floating features and things like that. That's because for first focal plane you have to use a glass reticle, at least right now with where technology's at. But those scopes I wouldn't call true daylight bright. I mean, they're okay. They do have illumination, and you can pick them out even when it's sunny out, but they'll wash out in really bright environments. And then that's okay in some instances because that reticle is bigger. You've got some reference points in its second focal plane and things like that. But for a first focal plane rifle scope, it's really important for you to have that true daylight bright illumination. It really helps making it a lot easier to shoot and hit targets at 1 power. So,
Well, and the other thing is to get all that light up there. Right now, when you're talking about, again, a first focal plane optic, the reticle is up basically underneath about the turrets.
Yeah.
And to get all that, from everything I've gathered, the amount of light that you need for true daylight bright up there is far more difficult than to get it back here underneath about the mag ring where a second focal plane reticle would be.
Yeah, it has to.
Isn't that right?
It's not so much the proximity, like where it's located in the scope, as it is how much of, I'm going to use some technical terms here, so
Please do.
Fish me out if I get too deep, but it's basically the amount of what we call luminance area. So think about the first focal plane reticle is going to scale, as you said before, correctly with the image as you increase magnification, right? So the reticle itself, the etched features on a piece of glass, those aren't changing. It's just as you're magnifying the image, they appear to be getting larger. But when you look at the actual piece of glass, they're the same size. They're 5, 10 micron, whatever it ends up being.
Super tiny.
Super
on the
tiny,
first focal plane
right?
one especially.
And then so if you look at the Strike Eagle reticle, where you've kind of got that broken horseshoe illumination, that area, if you look at all of that surface area, that's considerably larger than what you'd have on the first focal plane reticle and the Gen 3 1-10 here. So
When if you held like a second focal plane, because that one in the Strike Eagle is still glass etched, like this one in the Razor here, but it's in the second focal plane. And if you held that reticle between your fingers, like the actual thing itself, wouldn't the features appear to be bigger than it does on if you were holding a first focal plane reticle in your hands?
So here's an example. Maybe that'll be somewhat useful for people watching in. So if you can see this band that I've got with the VTX logo that's on my water bottle here,
right?
And you see the actual VTX logo on my water bottle. This would be not
one's about the size of a penny, and one's about the size of like almost your palm.
Yeah. So this would be not dissimilar to the size difference between a first focal plane and a second focal plane reticle feature if they were at the subtending at the same size. Like this, let's say this is a 1 MOA dot for first focal plane. This is a 1 MOA dot for second focal plane.
Yeah.
So you literally just have this much more area for that light to reflect off of to catch your eye versus what you have for first focal plane.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
So we had to go to we had to use a completely different illumination technology for the Gen 3 1-10 in order to get that that amount of light intensity for it to be usable. So with a normal, second focal plane or even high magnification first focal plane Riflescope, what you'll have is what we call an etch and fill illumination system.
Yeah.
And Dave again spoke to this on that Riflescope podcast. So it's basically, if you think about reticle features, you have those chrome features, which appears black. And then what ends up happening for the illuminated features is those features are cut out of the glass and then backfilled with a titanium dioxide or similar like powder. And when the light hits those particles, the light scatters back. It's really inefficient. And so we partnered with a company who I will not name, but they have a really innovative illumination system for basically creating a really, really bright image intensity or light intensity in a really small form factor. So we went with a completely different system on this reticle, and it was really the only way we could figure out how to do that with and maintaining true daylight bright in the first focal plane. So, and that presented a whole host of issues on the design side of things with figuring out how to fit that in, especially at the first focal plane, and then making it all reliable, because we wanted to make sure that if it's going to be in the Razor line, it's got to be bulletproof. It's got to be super rugged.
Yeah.
And people not worry about it.
If you're fitting that thing in there too, you also want to make sure that you're not then taking away from like field of view or amount of travel that the scope has inside of it, right? Because I imagine that's going to be taking up room where an erector would be, for example, or something along those lines.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why I went to a 34 millimeter tube on this.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yep.
Yeah.
Fit it, yeah. And this still has a very impressive field of view and kind of still that same feeling that the Razor 1-2 or the Razor Gen 2 1-6 was always known for, especially on 1 power.
Yeah, I think it actually has a little bit wider field of view at 1 power.
Nice.
And I mean,
obviously a smaller field of view on 10 power compared to 6 power, but that goes without saying.
Right. At 6 power, I think it's still a wider field of view than the 1-6. And I don't know. I mean, to me, it's pretty special. I mean, I thought the 1-6 is an awesome scope. Mm-hmm. And Adam, you can maybe tell me if you agree or disagree. So I've spent a good amount of time behind the 1-6, and I thought, it's got one of the best kind of optical experiences that you can get in a low power variable. But the Gen 3 1-10 makes the 1-6 look tunnely. And I think that's that's crazy to me.
I mean, that is crazy.
But that's kind of what my takeaway was from it.
It's everything that you came to love about the 1-6 and more. I mean, I prefer the 1-10 in every way compared to a 1-6.
Wow.
And I've had to jump back and forth a few times in while it was in prototyping. Like there's times where I had to go back to 1-6 and things like that. And so I did get to do the side by side, and given the choice, I would go to the 10 every time. And it's not even for the 10 power. Like most of the shooting that I've done with it has been on like 2 or 3.
Interesting.
But the image, the interface that you get in this scope is just amazing.
Yeah. What do you find it's like when you do zoom up to 10 power? Because I know one criticism that LPVOs that have gone to a wider range of magnification
Yeah.
get is that usually once you get to that higher end, I mean, we're talking about stretching an optical system from being able to do one thing that is you're comparing one power, oftentimes everybody's comparing it to specialized, as we've discussed in the earlier, red dots that are only one power. That's the only thing they do. So they darn well better be good at it, and they are good at it.
Yeah.
You're then stretching that optical system to also be good on 10 power, which let's admit, 10 power is a power that you're like, I mean, of course, we know Adam can shoot up to 700 yards with one power.
Right.
But 10 power is a power where you're talking about shooting to a grand. You know, like that's perfectly comfortable.
Most of the world record sniper shots have been taken with 10 power scopes.
Yeah. So how is the design going into that where you're doing that? What's this thing like on 10 power? I mean, does it start to get hard to get behind, start to get darker?
I mean, I'll let you comment on that, Adam.
I mean, it's all relative to what?
Yeah.
I mean, so on, 10 power on this one, is that comparable to 10 power on the AMG? I don't know. Probably not.
Yeah.
Okay,
But
fair.
Certainly adequate for anything you would use a 10 power scope for, though. I mean, we were on some kind of closed private events, let's say, where we were shooting out to, I mean, I was in sniper competitions and we shot beyond 1,000 yards with the scope on a 308. Certainly adequate to that distance. Can you see in extreme detail at that distance? No, but you can see it well enough to shoot it for sure. But yeah, as magnification increases, the what's the word I'm looking for? Resolution. Yeah, resolution decreases.
Yeah.
When you get to that.
I mean,
But
that's not to say it's bad.
It's not
at
bad,
10.
but
It's. I mean, it's an
Well, I think
incredibly.
we're all kind of optic snobs, right? And
Yeah,
we're all
sure.
very nitpicky and detail
Yeah,
right.
oriented
I mean-
about this, and we don't want to
so
go around.
if you're gonna nitpick, that's what they're gonna get to.
We don't want to, yes, and we don't want to go around telling people that this is going to replace your AMG 624, right?
Right.
Because that's if you go
Right.
into this with the idea that it's going to do that, then you're wrong. But also
different purpose scope.
different purpose scope. You talk about going into, let's say, a very low light situation. How many times are you going to find yourself in a very low light situation? Okay, I shouldn't say how many times you're going to find yourself, but with this kind of optic doing a job that this kind of optic is designed for, where you're going to be zoomed into 10 power, I mean, that's a job where oftentimes you're going to want to back off because you probably also, in low light, it's nice to have bigger field of view, which you're not going to have when you're zoomed in all the way, and then zoom out a bit and use it just like that.
Yeah, and I think too that's an important distinction because if you look at this compared to other low power variables, and I'm not going to get into competitor names specifically just because that's not what I like doing. I think that at equivalent magnifications to other optical systems that are out there, this performs extremely well. And obviously there really aren't any that go above 8 with maybe a handful of exceptions. Right. And I don't know of any that are out there right now that go to 10 and also have true daylight bright illumination.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So it's really almost in a class of its own when it comes to that. If you look at all of the features wrapped up into one single scope, and I think for a low power variable that goes to 10 power, I mean, the optics are really very good.
For sure.
At 10 power, I'd say that they're better even than some other competitors at a lower magnification.
I would agree too in some of the focus group stuff that we did.
So it's something to keep in mind,
Let's ask MC Ryan here because, and if for those of you watching on YouTube right now, you may notice that there is a very large screen behind us now.
Yeah.
This is new. I like this. MC Ryan, can you pop up the reticles here? Because I know a lot of people are going to discuss reticles because we alluded to reticles a little bit ago, and a very important feature in any rifle scope, but especially a low power variable optic, where we're now talking about something that is both. It's designed to be effective at both close range and, let's just start saying it, long range. It used to be just mid-range, but, I mean, we can start saying it now, long range. So right here, what we have up now, there's two reticle options in the Razor 1 to 10. There is a BDC, an EBR, 9 BDC?
Yep.
And then there's an EBR 9, which is kind of a MRAD, and it's more, it's not designed around a ballistic curve. It's just designed around being like a ruler, like an MRAD ruler.
Yeah, it's a mill Christmas tree reticle. There you can see it
so
right there.
Now what we have up is the EBR 9, and this one is the non-BDC, so it's just in mils.
Yep.
And, okay, so we have kind of an open top half, except with the exception for the pretty much only thing in the top half is now we have this ranging or milling element.
Yeah,
I don't know why I'm going into this first, but it's just right there.
I call
It's
it a ranging
hanging out.
feature. I wouldn't call it a milling because you're not going off a standard graduation. Like if
Got
you
it.
wanted to mill something, you would use the
Correct.
horizontal or lower vertical
Correct.
stadia, I guess. So it wouldn't be this reticle wouldn't be great for doing that.
So how does that work? It's almost like a
So
an
it's-
inverse pyramid
Yep,
with
so
lines.
It's a quick ranging reference feature. So what you'd do is you'd take like a silhouette target, and that's what this was designed for. You'd put the bottom of the silhouette target at that floating line, and then wherever the top matched up to, whether it's the 6.543, that's the distance in. This one is in hundreds of meters instead of yards. Yards is on the BDC one.
Okay.
This is hundreds of meters. So if you had the top of the silhouette target,
Very
the head of
European.
that touched the 3 there, that 3 line, that would mean that your target is at 300 yards, and you can make
Meters.
your correct. Sorry, 300 meters. Thank you, Jimmy.
That-
You can make your corrections or your holdovers accordingly there.
Like-
Very, very European.
Without that super simple explanation, you'd be like, what is that?
Yeah.
And then you look at it, you're like, I could use that in 0.2 seconds.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I mean, we could have written the entire directions on there too, but I think it would
That
be a little
would,
too
that would
cluttered.
include the field of view, yeah. But it works on the gross approximation that most human torsos are kind of the same size.
Yeah.
And so that gives you a ranging estimation that would enable you to kind of hit something that size.
Yeah. And then obviously now getting down to the whole rest of the reticle here, we have, I guess how would you, there's thick posts, there's 3 thick posts. There's a 9 o'clock, a 3 o'clock, and a 6 o'clock.
Yep.
Those come in and they thin down, and that's where you really get to the meat of the reticle, if you will.
Yep.
Because now we have a center dot
Yep.
with a
Segmented circle.
around it. That's the part that illuminates. Center dot and segmented circle around center dot is what illuminates,
That's
right?
correct.
And when
Yep.
you're zoomed out, if we can briefly show MC Ryan, if you could go to our zoomed out photo.
So this would be at like 1 power.
Yeah, like 1 power. And of course, we're looking at a gigantic
Well, this would be 10
screen here.
power.
This here is 10 power.
Right.
And then MC Ryan's going to do a quick... Oh, wait, no, just kidding. That
Okay,
was 1
that's it,
power.
yeah.
We're looking at a gigantic TV screen here, so of course this it's a little bit tough to get our bearings.
This would be 10 power. The other one's probably more of like 3,
3
4
or
power.
4, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, one power. Basically, that segmented circle just shows up as a single dot.
It does.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And those heavy bars that go in from the 3, 9, and 6 o'clock position really just aid in getting your eye to the center of that dot a little bit more quickly.
Yeah.
It just gives you a additional reference point.
Right. Yeah, but the thin stuff kind of all but disappears. So you
Correct.
just
Right.
end up with that nice little segmented circle and center dot, or really it just feels like a center dot.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
And then those nice little thick bars to bring you into the center.
Yeah, and the reason, real quick, why we needed to go with the segmented circle is if we would have just done that, I think it's like 0.03 mils is what that center dot is.
Gosh,
Okay.
that's tiny.
There would have been that wouldn't have been enough area, luminance area. Remember I was talking about that before?
Yeah.
Wouldn't have been enough surface area effectively for your eye to pick up and for it to be bright enough. So that's why we had to go to that segmented circle for. It's for that red dot, like brightness at 1 power.
Makes perfect sense. And then as we move out to the sides, so we have mil hash marks out to the sides. And what do we have here? We have we have larger or thicker 1 mil increment hash marks. And
On
then
the bottom,
On the
yep.
bottom. And then on the top, we have
Half mil.
half mil increments.
Yep.
And then going down, there is that classic, what's the actual word for it? I hate calling it a Christmas tree. I feel like such a goofball.
We just call it a mill tree.
Mill tree.
Yeah.
Dot matrix.
Dot matrix.
Mill dot matrix.
That sounds like something you get in like Windows DOS or something. But anyway, yeah, you just have it going down. It goes down to 11 mils. You've got mil dots coming out from there. And
for windage. Yep.
For windage, and yeah, I mean, it in many ways, as you zoomed in on 10 power, it is something reminiscent of what you would see in that aforementioned AMG 624 or a Razor Gen 2 or a PST Gen 2, some of the longer range rifle scopes.
Yep.
So you're now being equipped with the tools inside your reticle to be more of like a precision long range guy.
Yeah.
Which is pretty unique. And then as we move over to the BDC, Ryan, if we can pop on over, we'll go to the BDC. This has got to be kind of on that intermediate power again right now. Right?
say
Or is this the zoomed in one, Ryan? Oh, this is the zoomed in one. My bad.
That's
Okay.
okay.
So we're on the BDC now at 10 power. There we go. Ryan's
that's at like
flip-flopping
3.
back and forth.
Yeah.
So we'll go back into the zoomed in one to see the features here. You still have the ranging thing at the top. And we still have the thick bars out of the 3, 6, and 9 that come down. They get thinner, and then they come in. And then now, this one's also an MOA instead of mils.
Yep.
And then Rob, you kind of explain what else is happening here, because this is now quite a bit different.
Yeah, so you've got kind of the vertical stadia that's right below the center segmented circle is a BDC reticle that has 300, 400, 500, and 600 yard holds for a 223 load, and we also added in 50 yard holds as well. So you do have a 350, 4, 450, 5. The reason that we did that is you could just put the 50 yard halfway in between the hundreds, but it's not exactly linear. So we wanted to just give that extra precision for guys that wanted to use it.
Well, and it doesn't clutter it up at all. You're not like, those are kind of busy.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of surprised at how nicely they are spaced out.
Yeah, and I would say also, even though we've been describing obviously a lot of things going on here so far, if you're hearing the word BDC and you're like, oh, I know what a BDC looks like. I've seen one in my hunting scope. This is
quite a bit different.
Well, quite a bit different.
What's different on this one is, again, because we went to glass, we're able to have floating features or ones that aren't connected to the main crosshairs. So what we have are wind holds at 5, 10, 15, and 20 mile an hour for each of those 100-yard distances.
Right.
And so, if you needed to take a shot at 500 yards and you had a 10 mile an hour crosswind, you just, put your target on that dot that's 2 over from your 500-yard BDC reference point, pull the trigger, and hopefully hit the target.
Yeah.
I do have a funny story that I don't know if I should tell or not.
You should, absolutely.
You can't tease it.
So we gave these scopes out to guys to prototype scopes to Adam, and we gave one to Ruben as well. And this scope actually won nationals last year. I think it was in November. And nobody knew he was running a 1 to 10. Because, if you look at it, it looks pretty similar. And we talked about this, too. And we're like, it's really pretty similar. And I know you showed me the kind of the graphic detail that you did on your 1 to 6. And you were thinking of doing something similar on the 1 to 10. I was like, yep, okay, we'll give it a go. And so it's funny that this scope, before it was even announced, ended up winning nationals in 2018, was it?
Yep.
So that's
you wouldn't know
it.
it. Visually, it just looks a little bit chubbier because of the 34 mil tube, and
and the mounting lengths are kind of reversed. You have a shorter front mounting length and a longer rear. But and the reason I said that was because there was one stage where there was some pretty strong crosswinds, and it was a longer stage too, I think.
Oh, Ruben crushed that
and
stage.
I think maybe it was like 15 targets, and he had like 13 or 14 first round hits on it or something like that. He sent me a video clip of it, and it was just like hit, and it was just kind of comical to watch.
But we've had these scopes in plain sight in a lot of places, and people are so used to the 1 to 6 and what it looks like that if they don't look at it too close, we put a little bit of urban camo on ours, so we put a Vortex sticker over where it says 1 to 10, and we put some white tape over where it goes beyond 6. Right?
Yeah.
But and we could even hand it to some of our teammates who were very, very familiar with 1 to 6, and they didn't really know what they had.
Yeah.
Until they looked through it, and then they're like, "Wait,
what's going on here?
Yeah, what is that?"
Yeah.
So,
what kind of ruse are you pulling?
you can tell we've got them side by side here right now. So you're like, oh yeah, there's some obvious differences. But like you said, if you're just used to seeing it, it doesn't really stand out.
Is this now the ultimate DMR scope, designated marksman?
Absolutely.
And what is the DMR? Designated marksman.
Designated marksman.
What is that?
So that's kind of where we were talking through before, where we kind of found applications for rifles that found themselves because of capabilities. So, traditionally you had, battle rifles or infantry rifles, patrol rifles, and then you had precision rifles, sniper rifles, long range rifles. And there's kind of this gap in between where law enforcement found themselves and then the military found themselves, where they kind of needed something in between.
Yeah.
So that was where, a classic example of that would be the Mark 12 program in the early 2000s, where they took a full-length service rifle in 223, but they put a scope on it. Whereas before, that would either be a bolt-action 308 or you'd have an iron-sighted 223. Well, now they put the scope off the one and then put it on the other, and they had it in between. But for
I have
those
this crazy idea.
Yeah.
Let's take this thing that can mount on any Picatinny rail and put it on this one.
exactly,
It'll never work.
But to bridge that gap, you kind of had this guy who had to be covered by his teammates, because they had to like clear a structure before they could get to the hide.
Yeah.
Or, that guy couldn't defend himself as easily. So that's where you had
When things got like close and hairy. And,
So that's where you started to see like these piggyback setups of red dots and things like that. Or like in the law enforcement application, like you had to have special training on magnified scopes to use them, and they didn't cross apply. Now, we've had higher power, low power variables for a while, where we went up to 6 and then the industry went up to 8. But I feel like 10 is where we kind of breached that threshold. Was like, well, now this really is a DMR scope. Like 10 power is traditionally the kind of magnification that kind of designated marksman rifle would have. And now it has all the capabilities of a 1-4 or 1-6. So we can make one rifle cover a lot of bases.
Yeah.
That kind of opens itself up to more weapon systems too.
Right.
Right.
And it's a more streamlined weapon system too, where before you had multiple optics hanging on one rifle.
Yep.
We've consolidated them down into one.
Yeah.
Or like in law enforcement, so they might only have a couple guys in their department who are designated marksmen, but that guy still patrols the beat every day with a patrol rifle in the back of his car. Well, now he can have that same rifle in the back of his car covering patrol rifle and his designated marksman duties on the same budget with one rifle. They didn't need to have two systems.
Well, and then from a training and consistency perspective, right?
Yep.
I would think like if I'm using essentially the same rifle and optic, no matter my job or the application, I would think like I'm going to be better at it. It's like, if I throw the football every day, the same football, like I'm going to be good at throwing that football.
We have customers that have expressed interest in that too. They're putting one scope on different systems. They're going to put them on SBRs and 308 rifles, and they only had to train their guys on one scope, one reticle. So.
Now explain, so speaking of some of these rifles like this, so we're talking about with the BDC, for example, which reticle is going to be more popular with which crowd, I should ask. And then also I'm thinking about now looking at like a designated marksman guy. Is he using the BDC? And if so, how do we arrive at the 223 style BDC? Does that work out with 308 stuff? So there's 7 questions to answer.
Yeah. We'll start with question
What was
4.
the first one?
Let's start with the fact that we use the 223. So can it work out okay with like 308s and stuff like that? I mean, I know you can always morph a BDC to anything.
Yes.
But
I think you need to do a different zero distance.
Yeah, the math's a little bit different. Like nobody wants to do the math, but like the bullet flies the same. You just have to true it to this reticle.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a very subtle.
You figured it out. I think if I remember right, because we're using the same drops as the JM1 BDC. I think with a 308, it's like 100, 220, 330, 440, and then like 600 or something.
Yeah.
Okay. But now my question back to you guys again: which reticle is going to be more popular with which crowd?
I would say
because that makes a difference, right? For example, you're discussing Mill LE guys, but then you've also discussed Ruben in competition.
I mean, that's what we designed this reticle for. Was more for a competition user than it would be for a military or law enforcement.
Yeah, this is the reticle that they gave us to keep me and Ruben quiet.
This is the gamers.
This is what we've been asking for a long time. If I were going to crystal ball it, I would say that this is probably going to be the more popular offering. Because civilian sales probably drives a lot more of volume than the private sector does currently, or government sector currently. So I would say this is in terms that most shooters understand or are applying the rifles to. It's also simpler. There's fewer floating features. I love me some floating features.
Yeah.
But there's fewer of them in this one.
Yeah.
It seems so fast.
On Adam's
It is.
online MySpace dating profile, it says loves floating features.
Throwback to MySpace.
Are you stalking me?
But then the other one is a little bit more like, I've always looked at like when you see a mill reticle, with the dots and everything. I've always looked. It's just like all business. It's all kind of. I don't even know a good way to describe it, but there's nothing about it that's. I mean, you can come up with things, but there's nothing about it that's like, oh, here's this little cheat to like help you be really fast in this one scenario. It's kind of like, nope. This is a really consistent way to do just about anything. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, when you get those things, you see like a gamer's 3-gun AR-15 setup, and I'm using the term gamer not like in a bad way, but I'm just saying like somebody who really is in it to make their rifle fast for a 3-gun stage. Right. That's not necessarily the same gun they want to take to defend their home or to take over to, something extant. That's the gun they want to use for that stage. Yeah. Whereas when you see, and similarly maybe to a little bit to the BDC style reticle or this kind of style reticle, whereas when you go to the mill reticle, that's like your utilitarian down to business. It can do anything.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and the other thing too is that EBR9 MRAD is, it can be used on whatever weapon system that you want to, whether it's 308, 6.5, 6.8, whatever you wanted to put it on, you could do that. And you just have to know your corrections. So
we were temporarily commandeered by MC Eric there. MC Ryan, could you please pop us back to the MRAD reticle real fast when you get the chance?
I think some people just kind of have a mental block at, it's a BDC optimized for one thing, but I have a different thing.
Yeah.
And it's easier to tell them, okay, we'll use this.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
And then there's also a few very prominent demographics of customers where it's got to be something like this or it needs not apply.
Sure.
So there, certainly on the government side, there's a lot of folks like that. And then even the precision crowd, like even when they're not precision shooting, they feel like they need something, or that's, just kind of how they prefer to interpret the world.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to be BDC. It's not perfect to my thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I interrupted you, Mark.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, it's probably what they're used to. They're used to a reticle similar to this. That's how they use their reticle, and, and they're probably good at it and efficient at it.
Mm-hmm. Another thing, too, fun little Easter egg, I guess, that I can comment on is we're showing the reticle illuminated right now. But when it's not illuminated, those illuminated features are actually somewhat transparent. They're not completely blacked out.
I noticed that.
And so...
Wait, what?
Yeah. So
it's almost like a soft...
It's more grayed out, if you will.
Yeah, so take a look at this.
Explain. And why did you do that?
Well, we did it for a couple of reasons. One was manufacturing.
Power.
No, it's at 10 power.
Oh, yeah, okay. I see what you're saying.
So,
the
other thing, too, is we noticed, so one of the challenges with having a really wide zoom range scope is a balance between having the reticle features too thin, manufacturing tolerances, or manufacturing capabilities, and then, being usable at a wide range of magnifications. So, for example, if we would have made this reticle thinner at 10 power, it would have been also thinner at 8 power, at 6 power, and so on. At 1 power wouldn't have been that big a deal. But at 8 power and 6 power, it's already kind of thin to begin with, so it would have been difficult from a usability standpoint.
Yeah.
So the thing with the center segmented illuminated features, being translucent, that allows us to still be able to get that illumination, but not obscure the target when you're on it. And one of the things that we were very cognizant of when we were developing that was, hey, is it too translucent such that you wouldn't be able to have enough contrast between your target and the reticle? If it's kind of gray instead of black, black you have a higher contrast, depending on what your target is. And we didn't find that to be the case at all, and actually found that it was actually a good decision because you're still able to see where your reticle is, but you're not obscuring the target as much. And so it's kind of a nice little feature in there as well.
That's cool.
It's almost like, yes, but no, but like, an open center, like in a long range reticle.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. A little bit.
Similar. Or
a half open center.
When you're talking about, really. Shooting red dots at long range, that's how you do it.
Yeah.
You make the dots so dim that you can see through it.
Yeah.
Oh,
yep. One of the ways. That's not the whole secret. That's part of the secret.
That's part of the secret. Okay.
So the reason I said that is because that's probably going to be one of the first scopes. I don't know. At least it's one of the first scopes I'm aware of. And granted, I'm not as knowledgeable as a lot of people that are here at Vortex, but if customers are calling in and asking, they're like, hey, is my reticle okay? That's, we did it intentionally. So,
Right.
Yeah.
just so people are not thinking that they got a defective scope.
Yeah.
Good deal.
That's
Makes
a feature
sense.
that I'm very excited about. Like that came on pretty late in development.
Yep.
And I was very excited when they decided to go that route.
Nice.
For sure.
Other classic things, you got the old razor the razor locking illumination. You don't need a pipe wrench for that.
And it goes up to 11 still.
And we
It
also
still goes up to 11. Thank
we also
God.
added a laser marking that says pull to unlock.
Oh, it says pull to unlock.
Yeah.
Oh.
That we also added that to the Gen 2Es maybe about halfway between now and when we launched the Gen 2E.
And warranty returns for locked illumination
Well, that's actually what
ceased.
Wow, that's actually what sparked it initially.
I know.
Andrew was like, "Hey, you guys think you can do something
Hey, check
about
out
this?" And
check out these pipe wrench marks.
yeah, so we put that on there. Because
That's a big one.
if you look at the PST 1-6, it doesn't have a locking illumination.
No,
it's
right.
just a rotary. So if you've upgraded from that to this, it's kind of a foreign concept. So
It is.
Anyway,
How are these turrets? Are these turrets designed to be dialed? They're capped, and
they're capped.
They're
They-
pretty
they
like
can be dialed.
low
They-
profile.
They track pretty well. That being said, they're not tall. There's not a ton of surface area for you to grab onto and dial. They're
Yeah.
not going to be like a high magnification turret,
Yeah.
like on a PST or like on a Gen 2 Razor 3-18 or 4.5 to 27.
We're
You
so
can dial
we're
it,
so
though.
critical on ourselves here. We
But
say
that-
they dial pretty well. We say
Yeah.
things like, "Oh, well, when it's on 10 power."
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think we all know that we want to make sure that when you go into this, you understand exactly what you're getting. We're not over promising anything or promising you that we've just made the unicorn scope that does every single thing in the
Yeah,
world
Right.
properly. But
Right.
dialing,
It's
there would
pretty
be
close.
It's pretty close, but there would be no issue with somebody who decided they wanted to dial this thing. I mean, these are
Yep.
designed to handle that.
Yep,
perfectly
and
fine.
it's laser marked pretty clearly. Again, because it's a lower profile turret, you're not going to have as large of text or numbers, so it's not going to be quite as visible. But
Yeah.
they track well. You can dial them. They have actually a great kind of tactile feel.
Yeah.
Just like the Gen 2 Razor does.
Yeah. That
So
is
very
probably the most-
positive clicks.
Oh
and-
yeah, actually, holy smokes!
Yeah.
that is probably the most notable thing though. Like dialing them for all day at the range might get a little bit annoying because they are so low profile, and
Yep.
but that also helps the scope remain low profile because
Right.
And
let's
lighter.
be honest,
And lighter.
and lighter
Yeah.
weight.
Yep.
Because let's be honest, again, this is a great one power scope that also happens to have the capabilities to hang out long range.
Well, and one of my favorite features of the Gen 2 and now the Gen 3 that's probably under advertised is that when you're looking through the scope, you can't see the turrets.
Sure.
Yeah. So
Right.
that this turret
They're tucked
is
behind the mag
Yeah,
ring.
it's tucked
At
behind.
least angularly.
Yeah. The way the angles work out,
Yep.
you can't see it. Where there's a lot of scopes that do have, really tactile turrets that stick up nice and tall and you can dial on them, but they also obscure your field of view.
Yep.
Which so a scope like this isn't necessarily intended with the application of dialing so much.
Right.
That's pretty slick.
But a turret that would occlude your field of view, well, that would detract from what it's doing. So
Yep.
Nice. Well, have we missed anything, Rob?
the mag ring turns way easier. Like way easier.
Oh,
Yeah.
So much.
Let's
So much.
so much. Okay, so that's a good solid turn.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, on the
We
Razor
heard, we heard
1-6.
you on the mag ring tension from the Gen 2, loud
Yeah.
and clear.
Oh, it's a little.
So many people are like, oh, throw lever required, blah blah blah. Like,
Oh, well, another
I don't
thing,
even
too.
put one on.
Jim
too.
had this cranked all the way over to the right
Yeah.
already, and I went to crank it to the right. I was like,
Impossible.
Yeah,
She's
we'll go
locked
this
up.
way.
Mark's over there. Oh yeah, super
Yeah.
easy.
Yeah, where's that pipe wrench you were talking about, Jim? I'm gonna get her to go.
So another thing too that's nice for the Gen 3 is even though the mag ring is a lot easier to turn, we are including a switch view through a lever in the box as well with it. So if you do want to run
nice.
it,
Oh, cool.
you'll have it and you won't need to buy anything else. Certainly you can buy other throw levers, but we wanted to include that one as well, a little
Nice.
extra value to the customer. So
Oh, and from the peanut gallery, why did we not include the throw lever in the magnification ring?
well, because there was enough, I think, consternation over where to put the throw lever location and it
Like the threaded hole
the
for
threaded
it, if you were
hole,
to
yeah.
thread in.
Yep, and that also, I don't know, depending on if we were going to put that into the mag ring, it's a fixed location. So depending on what rifle, again with the, we wanted to have common parts, mechanical parts between the BDC and the MRAD 1 variants, and so if you're going to put it on a bolt gun or you're going to put it on an AR, it's not really as big a deal. But just having it round and symmetrical allows you to put the switch view wherever you want to, versus it being in a finite location.
Fully customizable.
Fully customizable.
Oh, there you go.
Well,
Hey,
would it also be
mark
correct
for
to say
marketing?
it's intended as an external failure point instead of an internal?
Yep, that's another great point. So if thanks for bringing that up. So if you smoke that lever on a barrel as you're dumping your rifle or something, and it ends up shearing off or fracturing the mag ring, and now you're stuck at whatever magnification you were previously set on. Now the switch view will just come off, and you can still use it without a throw lever, which you don't need because the magnification ring tension is a lot lighter now. So
Nice work, Adam.
yeah, good plug there.
Hey, here's maybe a final question for people to ponder over, or Rob, you to ponder over.
Sure.
Adam, you asked this earlier. I liked it. Why stop at 10?
Yeah. Why stop at 10?
Why stop at 10? Is
Well
it
said,
possible?
we did.
Is it even possible to make like a?
Well, so remember what I was talking about earlier, and the reticle feature size relative to manufacturing capabilities, and then also what you're able to do with the optical system. So as you're going higher in magnification, you need to be able to resolve better. Otherwise, that extra magnification isn't useful necessarily. And then also, if we were to keep the same, so we're pretty much at the manufacturing limit as far as feature sizes go. Okay,
Right.
for this reticle, we can't really go smaller and actually manufacture the reticle.
Mm-hmm.
So what would happen then if you go up to 12 is that is now going to scale an extra 20% in thickness. So you might have, the reticle features are going to be larger because they're going to magnify, with the image. So those are just some of the trade-offs at the reticle level. And then obviously there's a bunch of things with the optical system that you'd need to reconsider to have usable resolution. That's probably going to drive the price of that scope up farther. So, I mean, it's not to say that you might not see that in the future. I know a lot of people have talked to us about doing a 1 to 10 second focal plane rifle scope. That's a different thing, but it's, again, with second focal plane subtensions for the reticle only being accurate at a certain magnification, which generally
1 of
tends
10,
to be
10% of the time.
So that doesn't lend itself to a great use case. And then kind of conversely for the first focal plane one, you run into, some reticle design issues potentially and just probably a significantly increased cost for being able to accommodate the extra magnification there.
Let's say there was a lucrative market out there for customers with $25 million to spend on a 1 to 24.
Wow.
Would it be possible?
Well, anything's possible with enough time and money. That being said, I think
It's a lot of money, Mark.
yeah, that's I maybe shouldn't speak so absolutely, but generally speaking, most things are possible with enough time and money. That being said, a 1 to 24.
It would take care of everything.
It would.
Everything.
Literally do.
So here, okay, so here would be the
I
thing.
put Rob on this. This is probably a terrible question to ask an engineer.
You would have what you would find that you'd run into is either probably above 14 power, you would have a reticle that's so thick it wouldn't be usable.
Okay, fair. Yeah.
And if you were able to somehow get it to be small enough where it was usable, it wouldn't be usable between anything below 12 power.
Oh, yeah.
It would
'cause
just be super thin. You wouldn't see it
basically
at all.
invisible.
And so just to give you
a telescope
a frame of
until you're
reference
on
here,
12 power.
some of those reticle features, I'm not exactly sure what the size of them are, but they're like on the order of microns. So millionths of an inch. And so
How thick is the human hair?
I think it's like 70 or 80
Yeah,
micron.
somewhere in there.
So it's
For
like
point
10,
of reference. I'm kind of a caveman, so I need
it's more than 10 times smaller than the human hair is in diameter. And so, if you were going to now go from 10 to 24 power, all else being equal, the feature sizes would need to get 2.4 times thinner than that to maintain the same angular subtension.
That's brutal.
Yeah, so I mean, it's possible. There might be some cool technologies in the future that allow us to do some crazy things with like overlaid features or, different different things where we're able to make something like that work. But as of right now, it's not readily available.
Yeah. No, that's fair. This is the kind of crap I like doing with my older brothers too, Sam and Dave. You just throw them a question that you didn't really even think about that much, but then you make them think a lot about it.
Just kind of pull the pin on that grenade and just toss it out.
Hey, here you go.
They won't be able to sleep for the next 17 weeks
Here,
pondering
this.
this question that you just hucked out of your pocket.
Out of my butt.
It's going to be this time next year. I'm going to be like, well, Jim, I was thinking about this, so we couldn't quite get up to 1 to 24, but here's a 1 to 20 prototype.
Yeah.
Rob's got 0 hair left. Yeah, I've been thinking about what you said a year ago.
Yeah, pretty gray. Excellent. Okay, well, everybody, at the time of this release, now depending on when you listen to this, maybe they'll already been well released, but at the time of this release, there may be a little bit until you can actually get one of these in your hands and see it. But we can assure you, if you get the chance in your local dealer, or you see us at one of the shows out there, or you happen to buzz by the showroom here in Barneveld, Wisconsin, southwestern Wisconsin here, you should definitely check this out and see it side by side with the 1-6 Razor Gen 2 that so many people have been familiar with since, I think 2012 was when that thing came out. So
and continuing production still.
Continuing production still. That's the thing,
that's
is
a good
it's
point.
not disappearing. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, there'll be a price difference between the two. So
that is going to be our second focal plane low power variable option.
Yeah, in the
Add
Razor
that
line.
High-end, bomb-proof, proven for nearly now the time you're going to listen to this, about 8 years. So check it out. Yeah, do the side-by-side thing, and let us know what you think of low-power variables as well, because we discussed that here a little bit too, and it will probably likely continue to be a point of contention amongst the old red dot fans and prism scope fans, holographic fans, and the low-power guys, and the precision guys now will probably be getting their hands in the mix talking about these things. And so very curious. Hope we spark up a lot of interesting debates and conversations. And yeah. What do you think? I think we're going to cap this one off. We'll post up some of these pictures of the reticles too that we've been showing behind us, and catch you all next time. All right.
Catch you later.
Over and out.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
All right, that'll wrap it up for this episode of the Vortex Nation podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Hit that subscribe button so you can always stay up to date on the latest happenings over here at the Vortex Nation podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at Vortex Nation Podcast. Again, everybody, thanks, and happy hunting and shooting. We appreciate it. Have a good one.